right then, this is a poetry collection called Gravity Girl, a diagram of descent that I wrote in the summer of 2017. And I published it on Amazon, and it was up there for a couple of years, and then I got dissatisfied with it and took it down and did some rewriting on it. And now I'm finally in the process of restoring it back to Amazon. And here, what I want to do is read through the entire manuscript on YouTube here. And so it's called a diagram of descent because the descent is meant to evoke the Gnostic myth of the fall, sinking, and capture of the soul into a material body. So the central character here is a character named Mary, whose soul has fallen down onto the physical plane, become entrapped in a body, and she has forgotten her divine origins, and her life ends up in dissipation and eventually death, but also a restoration to the heavenly world. So that's the arc of the narrative, the Gnostic myth of the fall. We have a quote from Rilke. "You are the bird whose wings came when I wakened in the night and called." In Chippet. "Sometimes where the trees scrape the edge of the sky, the windows of the horizon are left open, and a girl falls through them, tracing an arc of thin red descent, inscribed on the blue enamel as she tumbles to the earth through a metallic atmosphere brought down by the vectors of gravity that act upon her frame to pull her toward the soft brown loam that welcomes her arrival as she crashes into it and lies there, wingless and broken." Birth. "You went tunneling through the earth, dreaming of the stars as you ate the dirt, and you pushed against the mud with a face scarred by lacerations that marked you among the burning hydrogen furnaces that made you, and the curving graceful limbs as you crawled, molded by an ancient symmetry that only you could remember to forget, and your pallid worm-like wonder struggled until you found the right hole, and curled up into it, and grew silent and arcuate as a seashell made out of white calcium and pink flesh that gathered bones and sinews in a quiet darkness as the blood pulsed and the warmth held you until the cave opened and you crawled out into the uncertain white flash of a luminous sun that burnt you with scars and would go on scarring you and your retinas with the gold inside them until the silence that you heard gathering in the corners all around you came to convince you that you never quite belonged here." Dreams. "Where did your dreams take you? Optical horizon of luminal depths that emerged where the edges of your skull kept and held them all in. Otherwise they would leak out and soak you in dream forms that lay writhing and squirming, warm, tiny animals all around you. But instead the forms that changed into rivers of pink gold, magmatic seams riven with fractures where old dead things lay and stirred in the pale waters inside you. And the chromium leaves of a burnt autumn sky rained cinder cones of human ash flake all upon you, and the luminous quiet echoes of a distant burning sun that yawned across the lake of your childhood rippled and melted in the mirror blue waters that shattered their forms and rose up and broke apart phantoms in the sunshade green. Your dreams crawled and broke soft and white all around you, and intense translucent phantoms burned upon your retinas that you could always see whenever you looked against a sky the color of copper, or an earth that looked to you like it was made of brown coffee. The sun always struck white arcs that you could remember back then, when you studied cartography of cracks in the ceiling as you lay on the bed in your room and dreamed of giants walking upside down above you. Protean landscapes made out of black and white magma carved themselves and molded shapes just for you, and whole planets broke ecstatically forth to submerge you in the chaotic wobbles of their orbits around dead stars. Winged visions came to you, and you heard them come in and whisper things to you that made you wander down hallways and dark rooms, and broken, unhinged corridors where old memories bled stale and quietly in the dark. Some of them came to find you. They sought you out, those dreams, and grew long branches that reached for you out of the gloom, and crept over you where you lay, and dreamed of dark things that wandered across unlit sunless seas where migrating pink forms that grazed moved with an indifferent solitude without you, and you wondered if it would ever include you in its reach. The closet with its dead pale shirts that hung like funeral shrouds and scared you in the dark at night when the lights were out, and small pale things moved and rustled in the corners to terrify you. The world seemed old to you then, old and full of large, monstrous things that stalked your dreams and filled your head with nothing that you could ever remember except the silence, and the trees that rustled outside your window at night as you slept in the corner, curled up by yourself and lay waiting for death. Where you came from. Radiant orange chemistries splayed through the arcuate blue biomolds of the tiny hexagons that lie formed within you in micropatterns of serrated alignment, a prehistoric beauty that soars along tangled skeins of light thread ghosts and biomorphic lines that align you with a cosmic symmetry that effaces your presence and draws night lines connecting you to the sky, where cavernous holes in the exosphere open up molds that dissolve and liquefy into archaic passages of white gold light that packs into the foamate cores of your cells where spindle threads writhe and link to the poetry of your anatomy. The ancient core of you was made in the stars where cosmic gold furnaces of light fuse hydrogen architectures and efface atoms of gold that align in jet blue fury along ragged edges of time where crossed arc lights bring warmth to chaos and space. Sky molds dreamed of your face out of crawling bits of delicate cells that emerged to form spindles, ovoid modeled elliptical that turn and torque across liquid thresholds, where long evening skies form arcs at horizon's edge, and remember to forget the dark green furnaces in the genes that mold epidermic plasma. Too many stellar shadows framed you to walk the architecture of the night sky that broke apart like ice flows, where you grew a tiny seed in some god's mind who split you open out of the ancient pattern, crossed with the dark red inside you that made you yearn and grieve that the brokenness surrounding you would turn and give a shape that you wouldn't forget and that would remind you of walking along some vanished gold lane in a gray horizon of archaic evanescence that you never could remember. Girl, archaic green sunsets crawl along the verge where the line remains visible at this altitude, and even the sodden gray wrecks that heaved across the sky could never announce to you the end of something new that was beginning. Towers shoved their way through the soil, hatching like eggs to unfold pink buildings that open up and crawl, splaying their faded parts to the red-washed sun that lights them up with mottled stripes of gold. And even these machines, colossal wrecks of gargantuan infinitude that could capture your image and bind it to the luminous silver contours of the world inside and send it into orbit. Planetary cage that circles the sun in round gold rings and imprisons it with your cream-white face could never amount to so much, though you were frozen in the gold that locked you into a lattice of electron bones and made you spread your legs to a pulsing pink hole that led down into the cave that swallows all dreams and drinks the milk given to it and explodes with convulsions of ecstasy that vibrate your bones. Even the planetary blue foam crackle that hums around you like an archaic bestiary that someone plugged in and turned on to wipe vectors from your angles as they bleed on the bed where you lie cannot hold you there. For the sun drinks you and dissolves its molten core into a shattered profusion of relics that leave archaic fossils behind in the molds of black space as traces of your passage through it. Ghost forms peel tiny worlds away from my retinas and line iridescent cities around you with scattered optical density of white chromatic splendor that makes the air livid as the night dream chaos compresses a corner of time into the blue plastic space that made you out of ancient pieces of memory shells and old bits of carbon to compose the beauty that frames you. Broken. In the terminal blue haze, where the edge of the sky has gone and a chip is missing, a cosmic crack in the slate that sings of lost evenings reminded me of where you fell to the earth from the sky, a wingless archaic wonder that sang songs in a blue cage wired by photonic plasma that broke green cells open and splayed them across the surface of the place in the space where you fell. A broken doll, with a heart shaped in the core of magmatic suns that measured in crossed arcs over the skies out of serene, limpid pools that glowed above us as we walked beneath them and saw the edges come apart at the seams where something ancient opened up inside you, and nobody was there to remind you of where the core grew like the spine of a green dragon that followed the edges of chaos, misaligned in the night, made out of black bones. And you couldn't refuse what the gray chords offered as they brought you above the wrecked walls and mortices of vanished skeletal buildings that held too much of you inside them, where you didn't walk but remembered only the cracks on their ceilings that merged and bled with the soul that you carried with you as you walked and looked, and your dreams crawled along behind you because they couldn't keep up, and your shadow followed you, a thin, stick-figured girl of pale, worn charcoal and deep green sea shadows, woven into the arabesque finery of her beauty, by some cosmic calligrapher who could be called upon to align radial symmetries that mold and shape where you walk, and arrange vectors of carbon complexity to build radiant lines inside you. You walked to the edge and hoped that the abyss would take you and wrap you in its arms like the warmth of some old man who forgot to find you beneath the still glowing wreckage of your tiny beautiful dreams that shaped the forms that loved you out of burnt vectors of infinity growing like a garden that surrounded you, with an infinite care of tenderness that limed the shadows of the night all around you. Annunciation. If the angel descended to you, Mary, what would you do? If he dropped before you with splayed, iridescent wings that scattered gold light and arcs of foam in the air, and announced to you that you would bear in the pink cavernous complexity of your womb a cosmic son of the night that would arise from infinite fire stolen from the livid stars and built it with that light, what would you do? Mary, what would you do? What if the angel erupted out of disrupted shards of space and sprayed arcs all across the room that shattered the retinas of your eyes made by a god and broke before you in patterns of light that sparked and gave you a message from the bleeding stars that your life would never be ordinary, but a cold, frosted, hard, dark gem that bore chaos imprisoned in a mold of luminous orange flame that broke open and spilled forth the mire of your dreams and all the creatures that lay writhing inside them about you? What if the cold cosmic wastes of black infinite space embraced you and took you in its arms and held you in the infinity of a dark flame that burned black and seared the edges of your soul with dreams of light that could only be forged in the furnaces of the infinite night? Would you then surrender to him, to this angelic splendor, this wasted, arcuate wreck from the heavens that told you rumors of things to come and dark midnights that would confound you, to break open black riven seams of impossible dark that would spill forth and bleed into the sky with black ink and red like an old papyrus? What if the angel who came to you told you that ancient darknesses were gathering in the tiny threads of a mirror-black universe that lay wasted and spent all around you, and broke the back of the form that splayed the light with infinite curvature in a space of form so bright that the walls curved around you, and the space bent to surround you, and took you inside of it to become part of you, and merged with the shards of the broken dreams that aligned you? What would you do then, Mary? If the sound of the light in space came upon you and found you a broken doll with misaligned spine and no wings any longer, could you still arrange for them to shape you and carry the weight of the infinite loss that surrounds you to the stars? Could you manage the burden of a debt to God so great that black wings of the dark would hold you and take you inside space to form you and shape you where molds of light that made you grow into something huge and cosmic with wings that could soar and draw radiant patterns of iridescent light into the sky all around you? What would you do, Mary, with all of this beauty? Flows. Morphic aches in the white bone dream flows follow a silver thread of incandescence that is the measure of all you ever were. A depleted fabric of spent beauty that cored me out into a hollow resonance that collapsed when the light of the cave that opened up closed down. Sonic arcs of light crossed the skies and grappled with the sheer immensity of your weight. A planetary goddess spun from ancient light threads that form a broken dome of morphic symmetry. Hollow arches lie submerged in shattered wrecks of geological infinitude and temporal abundance in the orange seams of magmatic flows. No forms ever remain what they are, but yours lingers and haunts my periphery with a cold copper shadow cast over all my altars. You could never be, though you wanted to be, the morphic doll of all seams that imprisoned my semen in constant flows that squirted into your mouth and down your pale throat. My cum painted the inside of your stomach milk white and the glistening pink slit between your legs that drank it so greedily and caused it to vibrate its ecstatic raptures inside of you. You came for me, and you became to me a white phantom from the abyssal zones that surround the untamed wastes at the edges of the earth, where orbital vectors shatter decay rates and collapse all around us. We collided in the shells about the earth, where images annotate their walls with electron forms that vibrate and determine shapes and vectors in the morphological flows. And the dream of your ghost? A retinal burn I could never forget. Shattered luminosity. If the sky was green, would post-luminal abysses resonate in the dark of the seas that surround us? How many of them would it take? In the ivored recesses of the corridors where soft pink arches resound, to shattered vectors where satellites gather to sculpt the contours of the earth in green, brown, gray topological waste. A tiny, frail, pale white girl lost on the planet in exorbital spaces of satellized interiors, where angels gather to collect the ruins of faded dreams from fields of decrepitude, and sonic vectors resonate to morphotechnic wonders that never cease to amaze in the white-blue slate of the azure heavens that God made when he was thinking of you. You could never remember where the arcs that crossed the gates gathered to form a prison of white solitude of iron and metal that owned cold shells and didn't resonate in the darkness that submerged the world before the quiet that came at the end of all time, when the angels with knowing faces gathered and looked serenely at one another, with infinite quietude as they displayed the maps of what was to come and called upon cartographers to emerge and draw the vectors of decay at the edges of time when the sun shatters and falls from a leaden sky that leaks red ink on a dry slate. You could be all these things, Mary, that resound and break and resonate in the hollow dark of the abyss, where forms too large for memory encompass a catastrophe of benign neglect that salvages planetary waste in the void. I wanted you to be a tiny doll in this infinite waste that gathered all around us in broken streams of junk-heaped rubble that resonated with the pitch and timbre of knowing the forms that degenerated and further resounded in the black, vaporous waste of ultimate neglect, as the ancient dying stars framed their agonies in the pale radiance of an eternity that melted at every second we walked and stepped and stood upon a softening earth that fell apart with each step and watched us as we fell into each other and learned to love again. Name. I called your name in the quiet interior of Black Mother Space, and it resonated, as all names do, in the void of totality where dark things that angels dream of come into being. You hadn't yet forgotten the quiet, solemn evenings of our love when the sun died and lay waste to the fields and lavender pools of muddy light, and you became silent and thoughtful as the dream that you seemed to remember vanished over the horizon of your mind. You were always telling me your dreams, and yet you couldn't remember to forget them when the soft, pulsing forms that vanished arose in the black, silent darkness and commanded you to bear an ancient, heavy evil that you could never imagine would settle upon you and curve your spine into a rigid bow of neglect. You didn't want to believe that vanished horizons would melt into that curvature and create a diagram of descent that marked the azimuth of your decay as you walked unhindered on the edge of the world where tiny, dark humans awaken. And foreign objects of benign decrepitude crawled inside of you, a pallor of neglect that emerged to walk into a twilight of shadows, where souls etched into the night mimicked the ancient paths of the stars that marked the sky with bright incisions above you. How many orange evenings that you spent wasting the darkness of white liquor inside you that ran a chaos of incertitude so malign that you could remember your sins and count them, with tiny pink fingers that resonated in the gloom of your small, shadowed apartment. You crawled the walls, searching for an answer there, but there wasn't one. Only the shadow of your mind that projected a frame emerging all around the darkness that splayed an infinite light that no one could make but you, and you made it badly. However many dreams that deflated inside of you as you waited for the emergence of a new shadow to come that would arise and conflate you into a panic of subsidence, where quakes would annihilate all those feelings that knew you and crawled away into the cold, dark places where they could no longer be found. You knew the dreams would come, but you hid on the couch in the rain as it came and crawled on the glass in tiny squirming rivers that marked you again, and you waited to hear as the arcs of the light flooded the walls and brought you to the edge where darkness began to bleed into your head and mark you with a kind of pale resonance that defined you and walked with you until the gloom came and shattered what you had once been so long ago. You no longer knew it, and you no longer could hold those forms that erupted inside you with cold precision as the lights died all around you and huge things crept from the night in silvery shadows that surrounded you. They got into you, those shadows, and expanded your dreams to encompass where old compasses could never neglect to find shattered arcs of post-luminal resonance that grew from the splayed lines of silver thread, where neurons entangled with dreams and forced solitude to encompass an angelic arch of white pale rain inside of you. Forgetting. Could you ever bear to begin to forget? How many times did the night align with cold dreams that marked you as an earth wanderer? Did your dreams carve those scars that cut your flesh with knives that you never could erase, and could only forget to remind you of the darkness that came with the rain? And if the night came upon you and found you alone with the bright, solemn intensity as a shade too pale to remember, then how could you envision the stars that watched you as wasted, pale wrecks floating in the gloom without moving? Too many edges around you, a waste and the loss that grew from your skull like a flower of bone dreams that shatter the edge where the night cuts across the slender lines of the day. Where did your dreams resound to when the ache of the night brought dark light and failed to keep or confound you? Had you thought that bright light would emerge and descend like the angel who fell upon a darkness so profound that even the wasted cones of streetlights couldn't confine it? If that was all that mattered, why couldn't you shatter the dark of the night that fell in pieces all around you? The sky was alight with burning, livid flames above you. Your heart was an interior that silenced every becoming and made morphological echoes resound that drew huge maps of orbital unfolding where planets crawled in dark arcs ascending as they rose bejeweled in the night that was dawning? How many times, Mary, did your heart unfold and spread into huge cosmic canvases that required maps and cartographers who arose to study the gray prose that surrounded you? You didn't even believe that cosmic vectors could receive an ancient twilight of lines that gathered together in clumps of gray wasted ruin that nobody has ever remembered to forget, except you. You never remembered the regret of planetary forms that molded the shapes of dark space and declined on the azimuth of projection, which taught you to forget them as huge arcs of motion that drew big charts walked across the sky all around you. No one could ever frame the vectors of light in the space across the night that formed like magma inside you. How many wasted evenings, Mary, did you lose when the darkness descended, and you couldn't refuse to find the vectors that brought you to shore? You were shipwrecked on a black island alcove where the rocks that forgot could tell you that nothing you knew would grow again, except the pain of your loss as it merged with the enormous stars of the night that came to enfold you. The God. You could never believe that a horizon was so distant when you tried to reach it, and it kept withdrawing from you, like a phantom on the edges of your vision. Nobody told you that the nights would be so full of stars, pulsating with their ancient amber glow that made you want to reach into the sky and touch one of them, even though its heat would sear you. You never believed that the ocean could touch you and creep into your dreams where it rose and fell and threatened to submerge you in a green-black wave of frozen blue. But it did. You never believed that the world was so full of miracles that they could realign your life and touch you with a vibrant beauty so dark that you could soar without wings upon them if you wanted. You never even believed that a God could reach out to you across the vast black plain of space where he could stretch an elongated arm of white mystery so far down deep inside you that your soul quaked and shuddered at the touch like a wave of orgasms rippling through you. You never believed that the stars could watch you with their ancient knowing eyes that knew everything about you and didn't disdain you with such serene indifference as the wind crawling over an ancient desert. You only wanted the love of a God to hold you in his arms and wrap a blanket of dark silence about you, to suffocate you in the awesome immensity of his presence, where the sky met the hinge of a broken earth that still remembered you as a child, with your tiny dolls and wondrous yearning, and the spaces that you crawled inside and hid when you thought no one was listening. These vast green immensities are nothing to you. But there is nothing so much as the presence of the infinite that approaches you as you walk past it, serenely indifferent to its power. Vectors. The orbital absence of decayed vectors in the shattered blue dome of a hollow space was what brought you here, from another place, somewhere else, and you wound up on a planet circling a dead star lost in a broken orbit made out of infinite arcs, crashing into a brown desert that never even knew you. And you wandered over the earth, where all the sight lines had broken open, to unleash fan-shaped vectors of infinite motility that lost the earth in a broken gravitation, where you followed the tracks of a path that led into nowhere, a blank maze of infinite night, where all the corridors crossed and set paths displaying your wreckage. You dreamed of one more horizon, where the infinite dark would take you up and hold you there like a small child in its mother's arms, but the gates were closed down, at the portals where they ended, and you suffered a loss so enormous that it shattered you and broke your resolve to climb one more time. Along ancient thresholds where new planets were being born, ripping chunks of orange magma to pieces as they left the green shores of the wastes of chaos at the edges of the earth where they floated away and surrounded you with their vectors, upon old maps that no one could ever remember to know, charting your path across the infinite waste of a ruined planet, where delicate dreams such as yours wilted and died beneath ivory mountains that shoved up from the earth to create a green forest of knives sharp enough to cut you and your soft skin. Those blades that you took and drew them carefully across your legs grew from out of your skull, but you were making yourself a cartography of pain, more useful than the old maps once used to shatter new worlds and chart old vectors. Orgasms. The ancient sun-wrecked eye that sees a crawling, luminous profusion of glowing forms that cast strange night shadows all about it and rain down floods of light that surround and demolish it. You were disabled in the vectors that bound you in the dark flood of cells that compose you with tides of streaming luminescence. Orgasms flooded through you and shook the vibrant interior of your body as you came and unleashed white floods of nucleotides that washed you inside out and made your brain vibrate. The quest for pink cocks with dark purple heads drove you to wayward arcs of desperate motion as you thirsted for the white semen that glued your bones together, and you drank it from between the legs of men. Narrow apertures that gazed back at you and made the holes of your body resonate where you plugged into the cosmic flows that filled you with ecstatic blue streams of light and made you shudder and convulse with spasms of delight. You were sick for it, but couldn't remember why, or where those urges came from that drove you to such acts, and bound you to the wheel of a delight that never filled you and you always wanted more. The darkened lips of your bright pink gash pulsed and convulsed and hungered to be filled as the tiny cave there shuddered with each member that entered inside it and squirted its white juices. That craving opened you up inside and hollowed you out where pink lines aligned with epidermic skin flesh that designed you by a god whose architecture you never knew and didn't want. And in the end, the night dream delights of your orgasms were like the missing wings that you soared on and bore you up in the darkness on a flood tide of cellular lattices that rippled like sea corals, or some sunken, submerged biomorph whose tendrils wove a fabric of fibrils in the waves. Sky. The sky was always your enemy. It followed you wherever you went, the cavernous black dome hung with bejeweled animals that crawled over the ancient amber vault, a jungle of zoomorphic stars that could reach into you, those animals, crawling into your dreams at night, where they pulsed and slithered and waited in the corners watching you. Slumberous, murky behemoths made of azure and gold that knew nothing but the poetry of your bones, aligned with the arcs and radial symmetry of the sky vault, filled with lines of calcium declination and cartilaginous longitudes that striped vectors of blood rivers that ran through ancient sunken cities submerged inside of you, where rivers flowed past in lazy meandering green arcs, as the zodiac of pulsing pink and purple organs lived with an energy stolen from the vault that never belonged to you and that you didn't want, and sat beneath it yearning for a death that would take you past it all, and soar with you across the infinite waves where no one in any country ever knew you. You wanted death. You wanted it to carry you past the slumberous arcs of sleeping angels who didn't notice your quiet passage as you stepped around them over the threshold of a land so foreign that nobody knew who you were. White gold lines of blue traceries that mapped a cartilage of bone and muscle inside the glowing nacreous vault of your skin, where everything plugged into the soft pink hole that you orbited about in the quest for orgasms that would connect you to a cosmic river you never knew and which ran past you with its gold-flecked sea waters. But the death that you wanted didn't want you, and it only turned away and closed its gate as the silent rapture of the endogenous blue cavern above held your flows, pulsing with all their juices in rapturous green ecstasy that pulled you to the earth, while the sky claimed to own the shattered remnants of your soul, and you were caught in between with the glowing amber animals that waited silently as you slept, and gave you slices of infinite gravity that merged as you bled into the sky in your dreams, where rivers of wistful incertitude took your blood and cycled it into orbit around the planet, a blue ball with you inside of it, coming again and again as the rivers pulsed through you and shot forth in explosions that wrecked your frame and left you spent and expended like some animal who has abandoned its shell and crawled on to other things. Those animals inside you that came from the burning heavens and made their demands to connect the slit between your legs to the lovely burning orange flames that lit up the night, all across a vault that you could only plug into and connect your being with its ancient burning amplitude that resonated across all frequencies and beheld your death as a tiny, frail, pale girl that lay strangled and forgotten in a ditch somewhere. This was your dream, to become the dead girl who lived and walked with marks upon her soul that shattered the fibrous lines connecting her to ancient blood rivers that flowed around the earth and captured a visage into orbit that fell wingless and broken to the ground where you lay, vibrating to the stars that circled you, waiting for your blood to pour itself into their mouths as you fed them at last, those animals. Tiny girl. Sun-washed eggs in the cold gloom where archaic interiors emerged to unfold a landscape of dead crosses, each with a tiny bleeding body upon it, dying in a field of vanilla snow. All these dead gods gathered around you where sun foam arcs at the edge of the horizon splay their forms to newborn worlds that rupture out of the edge of the earth, and cosmic vortices of space junk demand floating vectors to rival oceans of green, where worlds descend and die into the surge around them. You could only ever believe that any of these worlds was made for you, where you would unfold your tiny girl's life beneath gigantic burning suns, where trees swarmed and died at the edges of frosted azure lakes and yellow pools of silicate magma. Your small heart expanded to greet them and encompass the geography of their descent, as worlds were born and died all around you with an astonishing speed that traversed the core of your brain and made you wonder how you could have missed so many possibilities when there were so many worlds surrounding you. But your life was never meant for gods, Mary. Only the flourishing of wasted sunsets and broken altars, where nobody but you came to worship any longer, as the sun died before you through the trees, where old rotten houses still stood with their memories. But none of yours were alive, because you had killed them all, with knives inside you that burst each one asunder as it emerged before you, and spread with radiant wonder above your astonished gaze. You could never believe, Mary, that any of them were for you, and your tiny cosmic soul that could no longer remember their vanishing or their birth. So you stood with quiet thought at the edges of chaos, and watched them emerge into the light, and as they grew larger, you became smaller, until you entered only a world of molecules with mathematical vectors intact in their scintillating gray carapaces, with metallic arcs that foamed in the light all around you. Crucifixion Mary. They left you there, in a field with rotting trees, tied to a stump with shorn branches, your arms aligned to vectors in the sodden gray sky where clouds drifted like shipwrecks, and your face was bulbous with bruises, your soft oaken hair matted with streaks of oily blood, your body an ancient earth map of cuts where they had beaten you and left you to die on that old tree. With the wind was blowing, and sounds came from the trees that resembled laughter, for even the trees were in a conspiracy against you as you stood upright, splayed and ruined upon their wood, on a day that the earth had chosen for your torment beneath ragged winds and decaying trees and dirt the color of iron oxide. And then it began. The blood that poured from your naked vulva ran out in streams, arcing in clads down your legs, that bifurcated and ramified and told of maps of new countries yet to be explored. And the blood kept draining and slicing and dividing as it leaked into the soft, mud-wet soils of an earth that the rain had recently touched, with small iridescent pools that mirrored a grimy, smeared yellow sun. And the blood from between your legs kept pouring, so much of it that you never knew such blood could bleed from you, and it began to carve tiny pools and rivers into the soils all around you, pools of your blood that fed the greedy earth, which had always been hungry for you, ever since the arc of your descent, when it was small and ancient, and you were young, tides of foaming blood forming around you, leaking and rising and slicing and digging furrows into the dirt, where stones soaked it into their geomorphic masses, and resonant brown clods were stained pink as the rivers that you gave birth to as you died rose all around you, and began to merge with the marbled brown vectors of the earth and its gold-colored striations as your blood leaked and arced into it, and you and the earth were fused together at last into one pulsing cosmic unity that always reminded you of your dreams, to be beaten and strangled and left for dead, like an orgasm of pain that satisfied you more deeply than any orgasm ever could. And the clouds with their shifting granite menace unloaded on you, and the rain dumped in thin silver strands that lashed you and washed the blood away, and poured upon you a baptism of heavenly insemination that rinsed you and purified you and cored the hollowness out of you. And you became something new, caught between the flood from above and the running rivers of blood that you gave birth to below, and the two liquids meshed and fused as the earth absorbed you, what you had always wanted to be drawn down into it, to die and feel yourself grown immense, large enough to surround the planet and encompass it within you from a broken gray sky that rained upon your ruinous soul, and made you feel glad. Mary descends into hell. The furnaces opened up, riven gashes of glowing magma that striped the earth with silicate foam and geological desuetude. You found yourself walking along the course of a river in a blue-purple darkness, surrounded by phosphorescent light. The rocks glowed black, and the stones all around you were blue-glowing coals in the night. The river beside you radiated a soft gold green in the luminous dark and arced across a wasted, flat black plain, a silver thread that vanished across an immense treeless span. You were walking naked, and your vulva was pulsing as the blue chromatic satin sky darkened above you. A spiky tree with bare, slender branches became visible in the gloom, and two men, their flesh-white bodies luminous and pale, stood waiting for you. They were naked too, and they watched as you approached them. One of them ordered you down on your knees before him, and you complied willingly, as he stuffed his pink and gorged member into your mouth and then slapped your face while it was in there, choking into the back of your throat, a thick flesh tube that he rammed in and out of you. And behind you in the cold black gloom, the other man got down and raised the arch of your hips upward as he slid his own stiff member into your vulva from behind and began slamming it into you until rippling waves of orgasms detonated from inside and spread like a tsunami of pleasure in vast vibrating heaps through your limbs as they shaked. Suddenly the other man spurted hot, phlegmy liquid into your mouth, which you swallowed all at once in a single gulp, while at the same time the man behind you erupted with a geyser of white liquid inside you, and another wave of concentric orgasms hollowed you out as he came. You cried out, but the men were done with you, and they left you there, a heap of ragged, heaving flesh, your vulva still quaking warmly inside you. You lay in the dirt, breathing raggedly, a wasted and spent wreck of biological ruin, as 4 men approached out of the gloom, all wearing masks that dissolved their faces into smooth pink erasures of flesh, and wearing white linen robes that glowed in the night as they came to collect you, and carried you into a cube-shaped mud-brick house, from whence a cavernous yellow glow expanded into the night through 2 square-shaped open windows. They placed you on a table, lying flat on your back, gazing up at the bent log ceiling that bowed inwards as though it were about to collapse, and they began to disassemble you. First they removed your jaw from your face, snapping and cracking it away in blood flows of endless liquid, and they sliced open your torso with an obsidian blade, just as though they were unzipping you, and pulled out ropey strings of multicolored entrails, until one of them found your lavender stomach and cut it open, to find what the seaman had deposited there, a small red bone, which the man examined, then set aside, and they cut into your belly to remove your womb, which they sliced open to find another bone, a small white one, and then went about with the business of pulling off your arms and your legs like a tiny doll with detachable prosthetic limbs. Bones made snapping sounds, and there were gurgling sounds as the firelight cast murky, wobbling shadows upon the sun-blackened walls. Soon you had been reduced to a pile of wet, pink meat and stacked broken bones in the corner where fire shadows crawled over them. The 4 men then produced the 2 bones which had crystallized from the men's semen, and they laid them on the table, crossing over each other, and began to mutter words that caused the bones to grow soft pink cellular lattices of tissue and muscle and bone, and wet pink organs that formed and were remade as veins and arteries snaked over bones that grew with calcium snapping sounds until your new body was complete and you were made whole again. You rose from the table, and they dried you off as you walked out the door into the black sunless dark of the hell all about you, and felt reborn, yourself from yourself, and ready to return to the world up above that glittered gold light through a hole in the sky that you presently began crawling your way toward upon the hill that was beneath it. Reborn. Vaginal cleft in the blue stellar spaces across wireless expanses of mobile unity, in the dream flow of images where no flows begin or recede to the edges of an earth that vanishes, into a wild, chaotic wilderness of red flowing forms that morph, recede, shape, and give birth to a tiny pink girl who wanders, gravity girl, fallen to earth from a hole in the sky. And the word flow that takes her in emerges all around her, a stacked rhythm of archaic fusions of words that gather in morphemic clouds in the neuronal afterfire of the blackened burnt core of her brain, where the words emerged with phantasmic quietude out of an infinity of possibilities that make earth forms shake, and words that form lattices all around her as she walks through glowing plastic foam on the inside, where the earth breaks and shakes in a gravityless orbit around a dead green star that implodes and explodes with the fires of an arcuate night. Word forms formed like eggs in her brain that leaked gray-green masses as they gathered together in denticulate webs all around her, and she only knew that in the words lay the key to the architectures of the foundations that made her what she was, a lost, tiny, pale, frail girl amongst the stars that gathered around her at night in swarms and came down to feed her and whisper things in her ear, to tell her of the beauty she was and of the love she had when the earth slid off its hinges into a blue proximate space that no longer confined it or her. As she walked over the brown-green surfaces of a splayed plasmic edge where the planetary flows gathered around her, and she wondered whether she would ever be taken up into the cathedral of light that gathered when the clouds emerged and shattered in huge iceberg heaps that amounted to nothing less than a cosmic accident of colliding dreams, where the tiny girl seemed like nothing, lost among those clouds that gathered and gave her what she once was, but couldn't be any more. She had been reborn in the earth, and it gathered her, and the sky reached for her, but she wouldn't have it and wouldn't know it, until the endless infinite arcs of the sound waves that tossed the earth forms that crossed it in blue-white surges of cerulate confusion, where no one ever thought to ask her what she wanted and if this earth was where she needed to be. Because there were other worlds, spaces that foamed and formed in the lattices between worlds, where micro-universes dictated rhythms of sound to broken rubble heaps that tuned into darkened suns, firing off spires of hydrogen alloy in the junk heap that no one but her could ever confuse with the light and the space that surrounded her. And the tiny girl crawled between heaven and earth, confused by her dreams that lent her a theme of animals in the sky and visions in the sand, across green lakes of azure frost, where boats drifted across, in dire winds and broken ponds, where burnt autumn leaves coated them with a skin of umber foliage that receded, and couldn't believe that it could ever be anything more for her than what she dreamed. Because those dreams that she had built up forms in the space of her head, where visions of crawling things lacerated the heavens, with amplitude and volume of things last seen only in dreams, where she couldn't believe that anyone could see what she was, or where she had been. A frail, pale girl from the stars, and in the space all around where she couldn't be found, and never would remember why she had come here seeking a love that she lost and could never find again, no matter how many Orpheuses wept for her. Chasm. You stood at the edge of the earth and peered down, and no matter how far you could see into the black, the edge always receded from your grasp. Even when you sang songs to it and reached out to touch it and made altars to it in your dreams that aligned the ancient circling stars just right for the blood that you knew would flow within you and circulate around the earth in rivers that bled into canyons and fell rushing into secret chasms where no maps had been and only old dreams lived there and died by tiny, shrunken, forgotten houses at the edges of forests and broken hillsides. Because it was only you, after all. You were just a girl, and the world was slumbering ancient and enormous. Its immensity dwarfed all your dreams and made you feel as tiny as a star on the end of your finger, while you grew pensive and imagined that new worlds would always erupt around you, as you wished for them to gather and collect all your sighs that could no longer trouble you, as the worlds built them into it, and the buildings that you shed rose like giants moving across the hills above you. Dream fragment. Finally, your heart would only ever amount to anything if the god came and took up residence inside it and made a nest there in your dreams at night as you slept, curled into a ball, and dreamed of yourself as a lost, solemn wayfarer wandering through an unnamed country where no one knew you or could remember your name, and the roads that you came upon were dark and shrouded with trees and mist, and you could only gaze down those roads wondering which of them to take, as the planets meanwhile circled their orbits in some far distant cavern of the universe beyond you, and you waited a moment in the silence for that one star to open up and see you, where you would no longer have to wait for the end of your beginning, when they came down to comfort you on lost, long, solemn, quiet evenings, with just you and your music and the fragments of your dreams that wilted like old lovers all around you. Final song. The heavens welcome you now. You couldn't deny it. The architectures of space merged and sought with planetary vectors that shaped elliptical arcs in orbit and brought down surges of ancient force that resonated through the spaces between them and brought you into them from the earth where you started. You never would know where it began. Somewhere across the silences of those lakes where you floated in boats and dreamed of black gold skies that always receded when you reached out to touch them with your tiny girl's hand, and you only ever wanted their embrace for them to come down and take you up where the clouds formed epic poems of shattered glowing giants and broken ships that burned off the shores of Ilium. You wanted to be part of that. You wanted to be the girl that they stole and that everyone scrambled for in the ships and the tents and the chariots that swarmed over the land. You wanted to be that girl. But instead you wound up with trash-heap junkyards and bone-dry alleyways and streets where sewers boiled and rats crawled, and you got fluorescent lights up above instead of gods, and you had to walk the dark, limitless nights looking for love that never could find you and the epic poems that never reminded you. You wanted vast armies of men to swarm over ancient green fields that glittered beneath a hot gold sun, where reeds and stalks swept with the rush of new winds that bore shadows through them and gold forms made of daylight, all for you. You wanted the world to bend to mold its shapes and its contours like the black space all around you, where gods gathered together in council and made decisions about you. You wanted stars and fires and ships on fire that sought the edges of Orion in the night. You wanted angels to notice and green gods to emerge that grew worried about the absence of your presence. You wanted cities to rise and gold to flow, and men to build bridges across spaces that lost all the ones next below. You wanted suns to be born in the black mother space that formed stars in the night up above you. And you couldn't believe that you only could have the relics of day that receded when the pink sun shaped the telephone poles with birds sitting on them in the lavender mornings against a mauve-colored sky where the newborn sun was shining on buildings, but none of that mattered to you. You only wanted dreams and clouds to come down and talk with you and stars at night to reach down to you and tell you the things that you wanted to hear of gold and men and stolen women and dragons with spines so archaic that the hills couldn't remember them. But alas, Mary, now you have been caught by the poet who knows you and turned into the ache of the loss that surrounds you and set amongst the stars in the lines of a poem that has learned to love you. You aren't just a girl anymore, you've become a song. Larger than the hills and the pink granite mountains where you've expanded so large that not even the sun could contain you. The light has come through for you, Mary, and this song has sung you and of your beauty and magnificence and lost brokenheartedness. This poet loves you, Mary. Ascent. And the black dreaming night pulled you back, where you ascended among the burning jewels of the stars and rose past the ecliptic and the celestial equator that crossed in the arcs of sky-red motion that led you through them into the white sulphurous world of paleo starlight, so ancient that even the stars themselves never knew it, and you crossed into the polished onyx sky, ascending past Sirius and upwards over the belt of Orion, traveling along the burning effulgence of the softly glowing night river that cut a stripe of hot magma into the core of the sky, where you were lifted up over the horns of Taurus, and then past Perseus and Cassiopeia, and even Cepheus, as you ascended to the arch of the vault at the top to join Polaris, axial pivot around which the luminous vanilla vault turned, and from your place there inscribed in the night you could look down and see the earth, a tiny cerulean toy spinning without you upon it any longer, for you had defied gravity at last, and burned there, a tiny girl dwarfed by the ancient glowing furnaces of the incandescent suns and stars all around you.